That's Todd. That's Shara. We're good.
Okay, guys, we're live, and it is crazy on here already. It is nuts. We got Dr. Dean, we got Todd, we got Shara. Hey, it was Todd's birthday, everybody. Wish him a happy birthday. He's a spry 24, I think, this year.
Plus 20.
Plus 20, but who's counting? We are talking today about promoting student growth with assessments, and Shara is going to lead us. Just a reminder to everybody that this group plus Nancy, we are kicking off a virtual leadership series that starts in July, and we're super excited about it. We've still got some seats left. Dean is happy to send you a personalized note if you need a video, if you need a TikTok, whatever it is. We want you there. So with that, Shara, take it over. Keep Dean and Todd in check, if you would, please. Nothing too crazy.
That's a lot of pressure. Yeah. Good morning. Good morning. So really quick, let's just start. Oh my goodness, we're like in a 3-panel. Okay, so we're going to start with, now I have to readjust who's on this side. Dean, you guys want to introduce yourself really quick so everybody kind of knows who's in the room. That'd be great.
Sure. My name is Dean Wilson. I'm the Vice President of Student Services for Uintah Basin Technical College. I've served as a high school principal, a middle school principal, and a assistant superintendent of schools. So I've done a lot of things in education. I've consulted with a lot of districts coast to coast, and really, I'm really passionate about mastery-based learning and helping students grow.
So I'm Todd Theobald. I am a former elementary school principal, taught elementary school, have worked as administrator in multiple levels and at a district level, but my passion has been really consulting with schools and really surrounding this topic. So using assessments to drive instruction. I have the experience of doing that in a school, a really high impacted Title I school, and going from a failing school to a B school in a single year and sustaining that over the course of 5 years. So it's been just a real passion for me to be able to go out and speak to schools all across the country and work with teachers and teams and district and school leaders on how to drive that work in your buildings to make that change. The best part is that we see it happening. We see as teachers and schools use these strategies that it really can make a difference for kids, and that's the best part.
Awesome. And I'm Shara Johnson. I come to you from Nebraska, and I am known as the Canvas enthusiast, old math teacher turned Canvas lover of all things. I'm a PD person and a blend ed coach here in the state of Nebraska. And we are missing Nancy today. Nancy is typically with us, but we round out what we call the Center for Leadership and Learning at Instructure. And like Mark had mentioned, we are talking about a kind of a lead off for this virtual learning series that we are working on starting in July. And today we're going to talk about assessment. But before we do that, we are in this interesting space right before, now we have a lot of fun, but right before we came on the air, we were talking about budgets and planning and all of these things that are happening behind the scenes. And, you know, I am not a district level person. I am a consortium level person. But I talk to a lot of district leaders. So I know that this summer has been crazy with, well, not summer really. It just feels like it's another school day, and we're planning and we're working behind the scenes. And so I'm curious what you guys are doing in your own spaces. I know, you know, Dean is a higher ed individual. Todd's more of an elementary K-12 folks. So as we're starting to plan this summer, what are the different scenarios that you're planning for? I know Dean right now is in session, so that might look a little different, but I know a lot of our schools are, I've heard click to brick and brick to click and all of these different lingos. But what are you planning for? And then also, what is one initiative that you're really gearing up for this fall? So I don't care who starts, who wants to go for it first, but let's talk about that first to get us started.
Dean, why don't you go and talk about kind of what you guys have been dealing with budget-wise and how you're managing that?
Yeah, so we're in a really interesting space. All of us are in education, and I don't want to use the pandemic as this is going to be the major pendulum swing. If we push it that way, it can be, if we want to, but let's be in charge of the direction that we push that. What we've chosen to do where we're at, we're very rural. We have different levels of density in terms of population. And so really when the pandemic first broke, we did go to basically a virtual setting, but we maintained instruction throughout, and we did it very quickly. As our threat level changed locally from orange to yellow, now we're in a green state where I'm at in the county that I reside in. Really for us, it's been how are we adapting instruction and assessment to meet the needs of students, whether that's face-to-face or virtually. And so for us, we've just had to build the 747 while in flight, like many, but we have not missed a day of instruction. We have carried on and moved forward. And so it's interesting when I talk to leaders about, well, what does return to school look like? We'd never have exited. And so we've been able to adapt and move forward. So I'm very thankful for our staff's flexibility. Our instructional team has done amazing things in terms of providing quality opportunities for people to learn how to integrate with Canvas, as well as what does it really mean moving forward. So that's kind of where we're at. The biggest thing I'm interested in from a student services perspective is the E word, which is equity. I think one of the biggest things that the pandemic has taught me is that there are learner differences, both in our adults that are in charge of teaching and our students who are tasked with learning. And we need to do a very good job of ensuring that we have an equitable approach with our staff and an equitable approach with our students to make sure the water gets to the end of the row, so that we're not just doing virtual, we're doing virtual well, we're doing face-to-face well. Equity is what I'm focused on.
Yeah, similarly, I think that's something that in my experience, more in the K-12 space, we have such this need from parents. They want to know, what are we doing in the fall? And that's what's so hard. I'm down in Phoenix now, and we're just watching these cases just rise every single day. And so we don't, in fact, last night we went and grabbed takeout from a place, and there was a sign on the takeout window that says, they were doing dine-in and they've stopped that because of the numbers going up. As I read that, I thought, this is like school right now. We do not know. So one thing that I see administrators and district leaders really doing is preparing for a plan that's super adaptive. I mean, that's responsive and adaptive. It could be starting out one way and then switching. We just don't know how things are going to work. But I think that's the biggest difference. So being a former principal, this time of year, we're normally planning for like what our opening faculty meeting is going to be and what are our initiatives and how we're going to roll everything out. And what I see leaders doing now is trying to figure out how can that, whatever they plan, take place if it's like faculty meetings on Zoom or PD versus Zoom or Canvas or whatever they're doing. They're trying to work multiple scenarios, which is huge. I mean, that's a big task. I think there's so many people overwhelmed by that right now. But when you talk about like the biggest initiative that I think people are trying to figure out, Dean hit on this, is that whatever we do, we have to do better than we did it last time. So I think we're all like knowing that there will be some sort of blended or combined like instructional piece coming up. So I don't think everyone is assuming that every student and teacher will be in the building on site like a normal, like historically we do. And so I think knowing that they're going to have to adapt to this online thing is a more constant or a more continual thing. Plus, I know, Cher, it's in your experience too. You've done a ton with that. Some kids are actually adapting really well to that online environment. And so that may change as kids come back. They may say, no, thank you. I don't want to do 7 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning. I think I kind of like this other way. And school districts are having to be responsive to that too. But in terms of that, I think we've looked at the past few months with many of our teachers, and I know because we've worked with a lot of, especially the three of us and with Nancy, we've worked with people all across the country. And I know that there have been a lot of people that struggled initially, and instruction wasn't as strong as it should have been. And I know grading practices, trying to figure out how are we even reporting this. That's something that really needs to be strengthened as we move forward. And so one of the things that we will cover in session 3 really is how do we frame that to where we are really making sure teachers are teaching the right things and that we're using assessments to get the right information to help us respond to learning in the classroom. And that's unique in a virtual setting.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you talk about Arizona, and we're in Nebraska, and we've started softball. And last night I was at a field with the lights on. I was sitting in the bleachers. I had friends next to me. We were supposed to be social distancing, but our kids are like in the dugout together, and it felt almost normal, right? It almost felt like, oh my goodness, this is almost normal. So it makes me very hopeful. But like exactly what Dean said, we have to plan for this in the fall for equity. And that's what I'm doing with a lot of my schools. And I think originally we thought of equity as devices. Like we got to make sure everybody's got Wi-Fi and we got to make sure everybody has a device. But we have to also ensure that if and when that is accomplished, like Dean said, that the instruction is equitable and that kids are receiving high quality instruction. And that kind of rolls into, we're doing this high level of instruction. And Todd, you had mentioned the session 3 really promotes student growth and meaningful assessment is what we're focusing on, right? So I think that's a big question mark when we come back in the fall. Some of these big researchers, like I read an article about Hattie, and he talked about how, we might not have as a big a gap as we once thought we were going to, or maybe we will. And I think it's going to be different for every kid. But how do we actually go about, figuring that out in the fall? And that's kind of your guys' specialty. So, Todd, as we come back to the school year this fall, what approach do we take to figure out where kids are at?
I think the biggest thing is, like I said, is using the right assessments. And one thing that tends to happen in schools is we overassess students in the sense of I've had this happen literally in my own teams where we've worked really hard on assessments, and they create an assessment or select an assessment, and as we're digging through the data, they're realizing, oh, well, this question doesn't really give us any information because it was a bad question, whatever. And as we pick apart, we could have eliminated a whole bunch of stuff from that assessment and still gotten really good information. And I think that's the thing we have to focus on, is really making sure the assessments we give us the information we need to actually do something with. And as kids come back into the year, we need to determine what is it where do we expect them to be, and how do our assessments help pinpoint that where students are at in that learning process, and then help us and them drive them towards where they need to be. And it's a big task. It's a big shift for a lot of teachers, making that shift from assessments being for grades. And let's be honest, especially in some of those higher grades, assessments become the way I score kids so that I can put something on the report card, and less about how do I respond. But when you're talking about kids that aren't in front of you and you can walk around and monitor what they're doing, those assessments become really key to figuring out where do we need to go with our instruction. And then not to mention the fact that really using that data to pinpoint interventions for kids. So what specific things do each kid need, or small groups of kids need, so that I can make sure they're learning the key skills or concepts that we've identified that matter most.
And Todd, I love what you said there. I want to piggyback on something that you stated, which was we're kind of at this shift from, we're less worried about points, and we have the opportunity to be more worried about skill acquisition. So point acquisition versus skill acquisition are two totally different things. Like when your lights go off in the middle of a right? That was so profound, right? Skill acquisition versus point acquisition. And really, as we view assessment, I think it's really important to view it in two ways. One, it can't be used as a tool that's negative out of the gate. And what I mean by that is our students and our teachers are going to be coming back, and the first assessment they take may feel very evaluative of the group that came before or the group that they're with now. We've got to make assessment safe. Competence and competence go hand in hand. So how do we design our initial assessments to ensure that the students and our staff understand we are going to use this data to better our student outcomes, not to pinpoint our fallacies. We have a moral obligation. If we're going to solicit data from a student, we have an obligation to use that information to benefit that student. So I think what you're hitting on is absolutely key, Todd. And I think the thing I'm the most excited about is the ability for teachers to think less about paper, pencil, rote memorization and more about multimodal assessments. I know from a technical college perspective, as much instruction that can be done online is done online, and we're looking at ways to bring students in for skills pass-offs where literally the assessment is an authentic assessment of that specific standard or skill. And so I'm excited about where we're at, because I think we can take assessment, which has typically had a negative connotation associated with it, and turn it into something that's very empowering for both the student and the teacher.
And I think, so I'm going to jump in again, like I think what you're really talking about is a shift in culture, a major shift. But what's exciting about that is that so many schools across the country have been working on shifting towards more standards-based grading anyway. And so this almost, not to try to find a silver lining in all of this craziness, but I've seen that in our own district, is that our teachers have really gotten to the point where they've identified their power standards and created scales, learning scales, whether you call them proficiency scales or mastery scales or whatever you call them, that help even with parents, especially these past couple months as parents were home. They sent those home and said, listen, parents, these are the skills that are most fundamental right now, that are most important. These assessments help gauge where your student is at, because parents were all in this place of, how do I help my kid? Well, it depends on where they're at. And so these assessments matched with the scales helped our parents determine, oh, okay, this is where my kid's at. So I'm not going to worry about teaching up here, trying to get my kid to here. I'm going to worry about getting my kid here first. And then once they're there, I can take another assessment to kind of figure out their gains and then move to the next step. It's all about, like we talked about initially, it's about showing growth. Our motto at our school has been, everybody moves, everybody improves. That's the part that matters most. It's not everyone 100% mastery. It's about everyone making significant growth and making sure we as teachers and administrators track that growth and we can speak to it. Because at the end of the day, that's what parents want most of their kids. Not every parent wants their kid to be perfect or at the top of the class. They just want to know that they're growing and they're learning, and being able to talk to that is huge. It makes us feel so professional.
And don't you think that's a shift in culture too? Like the focus on growth versus a benchmark? Because for myself, I'm always looking at my kids and I'm really not looking at necessarily what the benchmark was, but for my own children, I'm looking to see, did they make improvement from last year to this year? And if they didn't, then I want to know why. If they did, awesome. But I'm so used to having conversations in education with a benchmark. Like, did they meet the benchmark? Well, you know what? Let's look to see if they actually grew. Yeah. Because for that kid, that might be awesome. It was interesting. I was listening to Dean. So I taught this spring, and going to this remote setting, my class is teaching teachers strategies for teaching, which is awesome because that's what I love to do. And so we do tons of like protocols in class discussion. I have them up and moving, and we're using stickies and we're on the boards, and it's fun. And moving to this remote setting for me, I missed my kids so bad, but I found that what I was doing a lot in person, like, doing a lot of formative assessment by watching their faces, watching their expressions, listening to them talk, I wasn't able to do that. And so I was really having to get creative. So like Dean mentioned, for me, it wasn't like some of that, checkbox, true, false, all those kind of things. I was asking them to actually, look at what we're supposed to be learning. If we're describing a strategy, that's different than identifying a strategy, or if we're teaching a strategy. And so some of those verbs, right, help us to choose how we're going to assess kids. But I found that I went to more of like a choice, where I was giving the kids choice and I was having them actually create something versus giving them an assessment. And so I think that's something that teachers, I know this is a leadership series, right? But I know teachers are really struggling with that, and they're looking to their leaders about, how can I make sure that these assessments are authentic? And sometimes I think we need to go back to our standard and look at that standard and see what the actual standard says. Are we identifying? Are we describing? What is it that we're supposed to have the kids do? And that's kind of what this conversation is. We're having more deep conversations about those standards and what's really, really important. But what would you say to district leaders that have teachers who are saying, how can I make sure my assessments are authentic? Like, they're nervous about this. I know. Yep, Dean, you're up. What do you got?
Okay. I'm going to get all up in this, okay? Teachers, this one's for you. Admin, please listen. A teacher's opinion of learning is still a valid measure of learning. Teachers are professionals. They've been trained. They know. Listen to your teachers. Please, please, please. Listen to your teachers and allow them the autonomy to identify what is best for their students within the loose, tight confines that you've created for them. Please, teachers, don't forget, you are valued, you are empowered, and you honestly know what is best for your students. So please don't lose that. Please don't lose the ability to say, this student mastered this skill because I watched him and I said so. And that is in many ways good enough. That is good enough for what we need to do. So I don't mean to soapbox, but that one's a passion point of mine.
Love that.
Teachers matter.
Well, I think teachers can become very easily overwhelmed by this kind of conversation about, like, they need to do this, all these different things. One of the best things that leaders can do is filter out all of the information and get it down to a real focused task for teachers. So like in our world with the schools that I've been working with, it's about identifying power standards. When we really look at the standard structure of like a core set of standards, like the Common Core, you look in there, and in like a language arts core for really any grade, you're talking about over 100 skills broken down into somewhere between, 25 and 40 standards. And if teachers look at that and have to think, I have to not only teach all that, I have to assess that and then reassess to make sure that kids are actually gaining and growing, that's overwhelming from day one. And so I think having principals and leaders and district leaders help filter out some of that. What we know from my work in really digging into these standards is that sometimes if you pick one standard, all of those or several other standards are hit in that standard. So you can't master that one standard without showing competence in multiple other standards. So when we select the right ones and create really good assessments for those, you're actually seeing a whole bunch of other standards in there. And it makes it so much more doable. I know, like, from just this last year, I was working with a school, and the teachers by the end of the year, even though it was a hard process, it's a lot of work, but the teachers said, like, I am a better teacher because of this. Like, my lessons are focused more than they've ever been. I know my core backwards and forwards. So when I teach something, I know exactly why I'm teaching it, what I'm teaching. So I think just if district leaders and school leaders can just help their teachers focus, they can do this work and get really good results without trying to hit every little thing in their textbook or in their core.
Well, and I think that Shawnee and Angela both have important little responses here. I mean, when Angela says it's overwhelming for them, especially on the higher ed side, and that leaders have to keep it simple for faculty, I wholeheartedly agree. I don't know where I learned this. This isn't mine, but the job of a leader should be to limit the initiatives so that you can focus the execution. We have got to keep things simple as we move forward. And honestly, as an ed leader, I don't know what I don't know. I've got to adopt a Mickey Mouse philosophy this next year. And by that, I mean big ears, big eyes, little tiny mouth. I have got to learn along with my teachers. Bam, go ahead. Okay. I've got to do a better job of being like Mickey Mouse and just feeling, sensing, almost taking a temperature check of what is happening in the building. As we talk about Shawnee's standardization of one size fits all, it's junk. How do we make learning personal? You know, if I continually am coaching a student in football, he's running the wrong route, and I'm yelling, do football better. No, run your route better. No, run 7 steps and then take a hard right for 3 steps. Then look for the ball. Skill by skill, kid by kid. How do we break that down for the things that are the most essential? I'll be the first one to say, at the high schools that I was in charge of leading, we taught 6 to 8 standards per term to mastery, with the idea that rigor and relevance are real. And if we master the things that matter most, bring on the rest. All I can say is when we went from a school that was far underperforming in D status to a school that was the 6th highest performing public school in the state of Utah, 16th overall. In 2 years, we did that by limiting what we focused on, not expanding our focus. So I think Shauna is right on, and Angela, absolutely. We've got to keep things simple as we move forward.
And I think that last piece really spoke to what Shauna was saying, was how do we do that? The funny thing is you can get better results, like Dean said, doing less rather than more. And so I understand the role that standardization or standardized tests play, that it does become a checkpoint just to measure against multiple schools. We see it's critical in the medical field. Like, we have to have a standard temperature just to see how far off we are. That's how you know if your kid's far enough, high enough fever that you need to take them to the hospital, because we have some standard score. So it does play a role in assessments, but like Dean was saying, that we have to create this culture where it's okay to focus on a few things to track growth. And then for those kids that already have those, that's where you keep expanding to other things. But you have to come up with kind of a playbook of what are those things that are most critical for the kids who need it most, and then branch out from there.
And we mentioned that our teachers are overwhelmed by teaching all of these standards and how we need to prioritize. But we also have to remember that right now, they're also overwhelmed by the technology. They haven't had to live in this space before. So we're asking them to do like mega work, because they're not only having to like filter out all of these technology tools everybody's telling them to use and figure out what works for them, but they're also having to focus on their curriculum. So it's a lot of pressure. And I know that our teachers are doing a great job of rising to that occasion. So it's been a really interesting conversation. There's been some one-off conversations that are like, we could do school differently. And I get really excited. So these conversations are fun. Okay, so we talked about how do we kind of get a temperature check of our kids. Now, here's the question, because people are wanting to know, we are going to target for intervention. And when we're in a school building, brick and mortar, in the same district, it can be really challenging to make sure that we're getting those interventions for all of our kids. How do we do that when we are remote? If we are remote, and if we're bouncing back and forth, what are some advice, or what are some plans or advice that you guys have for those that are trying to work on that? We know we're going to cover this in session 3 of our virtual learning series, but maybe just give us a little bit of what that looks like.
So,
go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, I think the first piece of that is to plan for it. And I know that's just oversimplifying it, but I think that interventions matter so much in terms of really targeting students with the right instruction that's specific and strategic for them. And because it matters so much, that we have to plan for it. I go back to the medical, I don't know why I always use medical things, but you look at that and like based on the results of a test that you take, maybe a blood test or something, they provide a very specific, well, hopefully, they provide a very specific treatment option for you. That wouldn't be the same if someone else had a different result. And that's all part of that plan. They need to have that plan right away. And I think we need to see education that same way, that not just here's the class average of tests and tough, some kids bombed it and some kids aced it. It's when I get those results, what do I do next? Can you imagine if you went and took a blood test and it was just like, meh, you failed, and try harder next time, you know what I mean? Or you need to study more or go exercise more. But really it's about like that specific treatment option that's strategic and specific for you. That's how we get results.
Well, I agree, Todd. And for me, you said a very important word is what are the procedures that we should have in place for this? As I look at what is the best teacher in my building, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to tell you it comes from an early childhood perspective because they have to be pinpoint precision when it comes to procedure. And we have to train our teachers and our students in where do we go for help? If I'm stuck, what do I do? All of these things we've got to train on. Thank goodness Instructure has a framework called the Fundamental 5, which we'll talk about in our first series, where we go through and we really talk about if we can't answer these 5 questions, can we really teach our students? And I think it's a really good checklist of before I take an actionable step in terms to instruction or assessment, have I met these 5 questions? Because if I have met these 5 questions, the opportunity for student achievement should go up exponentially because we have the horse and the cart in the right order. So I think that's critical, is understanding that there are tools out there like Canvas with communication built in, with the ability to provide feedback. Really that feedback, man, that is huge this next year. How do we provide the right feedback at the right time for the right purpose? And man, isn't it funny? This has been around education for about the past 10 years. How do we get better at our feedback mechanisms? How do we get better at our feedback loops? The good things in education and what works hasn't necessarily changed. It's the delivery method that we have to adapt to. And so I think, again, as we move forward with this, utilizing things like Canvas for the purpose of communication, for the purpose of providing feedback, only assist teachers by taking things off of their plate as opposed to adding one more thing to it. I know in terms of, how do we provide access and equity? I don't know how we do it without Canvas. I literally don't know how we would at this point. So
I'm just saying, from the Canvas enthusiast perspective, the whole time you're talking, I'm just like, ooh, you could use the scheduler. Ooh, you could use, like was thinking of all these things. And we were talking about, that one-on-one and meeting kids where they're at. And I had an English teacher this spring who was so excited to learn about the scheduler because she really wanted to work one-on-one with kids. And she's like, this just helps facilitate that learning. So there's all these tools that we have built in to accomplish this work. And it's just, how do we best use them and how do we provide feedback for kids? And so really good. What else do you guys have anything else to say about that? I felt like Todd had a cliffhanger.
No, I was just going to say, because I think I missed that point of it, is that there are a ton of options out there, technology options. There's Seesaw or Flipgrid or different things. And the greatest part is those are great things to use in the classroom, even when kids are just like they always have been. And one just plug for Canvas is that all of those things can operate right within Canvas so kids can know where to go right from there. But there's so many pieces. Another piece that we found from the very beginning was teachers were planning for their general instruction, which is totally normal. Just when we first started on our digital journey after of quarantine. And but then over time, they started realizing, I've got to do something for those kids that are struggling. And we had a bunch of assistants that were doing kind of menial tasks because we were just trying to find them work and keep them employed. And little by little, our teachers started figuring out, hey, could you schedule Zoom meetings and do this small group and this small group? So when I said plan for it, that's what I meant. There's technology options. There's additional people right now. I mean, our librarian wasn't meeting with kids every day and checking out books. So our librarian started doing some small group stuff and trying to help. It's really about, and I'm speaking mostly to leaders right now, you need to look at all of your resources and figure out how can we be most efficient and effective during all of this. And so when you do that, knowing that strategic interventions are so important, you can create a plan that really works.
I love that.
And we'll talk about that in session 3.
Okay, so speaking of session 3, when we talk about session 3, we talk a lot about the ITS model. So we've kind of tipped our toes in that already, but Dr. Dean, could you give us the high-level overview of what is the ITS model?
Yes, it's actually an adult learning progression, in my opinion, because it helps adults prior to instruction, prior to assessment, really think about what is it that I want to identify, what is it that I want to target, and then I'm going to have a self-assessment at the end of this. So I've got to identify the standard I want to teach. I've got to identify, based on the results of that assessment, what are my trigger points for targeting my level 2s, level 3s, so on and so forth. And then once I have targeted those students, reassessed those students, there comes a point of self-evaluation where we take a look and say, what is it from a learner's perspective, from the student's perspective, that they either got or didn't get? And from an instructional perspective, what is it that I hit or that I missed? And really going through and looking at those formative assessments for the purpose of instruction, for no other reason than making a better classroom experience, for no other reason than making a better teacher out of my teacher teams. If we're using that formative data correctly, I really think that that's where the power lies, is really framing it around every assessment I design. What is it that I am trying to identify that they have learned or not learned? How am I going to target? And then how am I going to self-reflect on this? Seems like Trenton popped up here. It seems like people get hung up on teaching the standard versus teaching the big ideas and creating assessments that allow us to disaggregate by standards. And that is the honest to God truth. People can't worship standards. Those are the end goals that we're trying to reach. We would never set a special education goal that says, I'm going to move from a 4th grade to an 8th grade level. Or in terms of weight loss, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. If I'm only measuring and looking at the scale every day, the odds of me losing weight go down exponentially. But if I'm looking at the things like healthy eating habits, am I getting enough sleep at night? Am I engaged in mindfulness? Am I exercising regularly? Once I start to focus on those leading indicators, that lag indicator tends to take care of itself. And I think that's the point that Trenton's hitting at right there, is we can't just worship mastering the standard. We have to identify and work with the processes that we know lead to mastering that standard all along the way. It's not a one and done when it comes to mastering the standard. It should be embedded into the day-to-day practice that we work towards.
Well, and I want to hit on what Trenton said too. It's, being able to disaggregate that data. Most of the schools that I work with are MasteryConnect users, which is the assessment tool within Canvas for those that are familiar. And one of the key pieces with all that is being able to get that data in real time. So I've had a history of using MasteryConnect, so it's been just kind of natural for my own teachers in my building. And when we're looking at data, it's so important you're able to break it down. I talked earlier about, as we were looking in teams and questions that don't matter as much as others or don't give us the information. And that's one of the benefits of having a platform where you really can dig through that data quickly and make sure that it's meaningful to you. So like with MasteryConnect, you can go through and go item by item and see which question, see the question and see how your students did, which answer they picked and why. And even more importantly is you can show it on the screen, whether you're in live or virtually, you can show the overall how your kids did by item and ask them to talk about it. It really makes that assessment more of a community experience rather than this high stakes grading thing. And that goes back to what Trenton said. It's not about the standard. It's about using those assessments to drive better learning relative to those concepts or skills that are needed for students. It can be a really powerful thing and really change the course of learning for students.
Well, and I think what you said there is important. Is it's a journey, and spiraling standards that have high leverage and high endurance is critically important. Students are probably not going to get it on the first go this next year, and they haven't for the past 10. It should take multiple opportunities for students to learn. That is not a foreign concept. So I think as we keep that in our minds is, are we doing one and dones, or are we really looking at this more holistically, spiraling this, understanding we have 180 days to get students to the end of the finish line. And you know what? K-12, I hate the separated lines between grades. We have 12 years to get students college and career ready. That is our end point. That is our aiming goal. How do we ensure these students are ready for the next step? We may have to go above standard. We may have to go below standard. Regardless, we have the ability to do so in the tools at our fingertips, literally.
Or to get them as close as possible to that finish line. I mean, that's something that really is a huge piece for me. I'm, come from a world of special ed formerly, and being able to track our students who struggle the most. When we look at percentages, typically, if you have a class average of 75 or 80%, we look at that and we think, hey, that's pretty solid. But what that masks is a certain number of kids or percentage of students who don't make any progress over the course of instruction. The kids who need it the very, very most, if we're only looking at class averages or percentage overall, those kids could go by month after month after month and make zero progress, and we could still pat ourselves on the back for having 80, 85, 90% class average. And so that's why it becomes so important to really dig through that data and show progress. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, that's why our motto is everybody moves, everybody improves. And on our PLC forms that we use, we really make sure that we're tracking progress for every student, because progress matters more than mastery for a lot of our kids.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so we're talking about the ITS model. The very last part of the ITS model, you talked about self-reflection or self-evaluation, right? So how do we support teachers in this? We don't know really what's going to happen in the fall, but how do you support teachers in that endeavor?
You mean in terms of like allowing them to self-evaluate how they've provided instruction?
Yep. Are there extra support that we need to put in place if we go remote, or if we're in this, unforeseen time? How do we put extra supports in place to help with that work?
So one thing I'm really proud of, like for my school, that we've done over the past couple months, well, now it's summer, but we met every week in PLCs, and that becomes a really critical part. So on our PLC form that we use, we ask for a weekly goal. So what will you accomplish this week in relationship to the standard that they're focusing on? And then that's what we start with. Our celebrations are not, lots of times we have meetings and it's like celebrate. Oh, I just want to celebrate that everything was fun yesterday, which is great. Those are great celebrations. But our celebrations align to the goal they set from the week before. And so that is that self-evaluate. So all along the way, we've been using that tool, and others learn from that. They're like, oh, wow, like look at how that worked or whatever, and then find out more. And so it really helps shape best practices in your building, because your celebrations are aligned to something that is really focused and not just, oh, let's see, what do I have to celebrate? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think the self-evaluation is escaping the silo, and making sure that, we understand that isolation is really the enemy of improvement in terms of education. And if I have the opportunity, especially this next year, where I can compare my own class's results to another class, provided I have safety protocols in place, we have good data sharing protocols we've discussed, there's high trust, low fear involved at our school. If I have the ability to truly work collaboratively with a team, where it's not about an ego, it's about the students' progress and meeting students where they're at, what a great opportunity we have as we move forward to really evaluate what works and what doesn't, given face-to-face, remote, blended, however you want to label it. Is learning effective or not, and what do I need to do differently? For me, nothing changes next year on the self-reflection component, other than, has the approach that my team and I have taken met the needs of our students? If not, what choices, what levers do we have control over, what fits in our hands that we can take control of to have a different output given a different input. And for me, that's huge, is making sure that we're constantly evaluating the effectiveness of the choices that we make.
And I have to say, sorry to plug this a little bit, but that in MasteryConnect, which is the assessment platform within Canvas, works beautifully. I mean, it's so easy. Once a teacher gives that assessment, if teachers on their team or in their department give that same assessment to their students, you're able to look at the results by question even and see how your kids did. So let's say your kids totally had a misunderstanding on question 1. You're able to then filter and see those results of every other class, how the rest of the group did, and see, did everyone's class struggle with this or was it just me? It really helps guide some pretty powerful self-reflection or self-evaluation in terms of, even by question or by standard or however you want to sort through it.
Well, and if you have the ability, Todd, I love where you're going with this. I'm seeing the reports in my head going, yes, I love it. What Todd's talking about right here, honestly, for me at my schools, it doesn't matter if it's been a middle school or a high school, as teachers start to look at student data in the same way that you've talked about using some of those reporting features, what that's done is it's taken away, well, this is my class, and it's changed it to this is our kid. These are our kids. And it doesn't matter if Shara, Todd, or Dean is the teacher. Guess what? We're going to figure out a way to make sure every one of those students that has yet to meet mastery, yet being the key word that'll change your life if you let it, yet to meet mastery, we have got to collectively as a group figure out what we're going to do because those kids matter. For me, that's part of the biggest power of the assessment piece within MasteryConnect is the idea that we can move away from these are my 30 kids to I have ownership. We have collective ownership of the 180.
So what I hear you guys saying is we need to continue this work, whether remote or not. And so what I hear is there's AMS, which would be our assessment management system, which is MasteryConnect, Canvas, which is our LMS, and how could those go together to be able to support our teachers and to support our students? So we're wrapping up, and Todd, so we've each kind of played a part in, the development of this series, but number 3 is kind of Todd's baby. So Todd, as we wrap up, maybe just give us some highlights of what people could expect if they were to attend the virtual leadership series and what they might walk away from session 3.
So really the focus is all of that we talked about today. It's really about identifying the things that matter most. Like how do you filter that out for teachers, working through the power standards, what it might look like, and giving examples of what some of these proficiency scales, mastery scales, learning targets look like for certain schools, and how that then informs your assessment creation, or at least your assessment selection. So when assessments are really well aligned to what we're teaching and the assessment is built so that it helps teachers pinpoint where their students are and naturally target students for the appropriate interventions. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll also talk about, the whole idea of effective and efficient. So how do we make things more effective and efficient, and how when we put both of those together, we eliminate the wasted resources and get the results we really, really desire. And ultimately, that works us into creating an assessment plan that's unique for our school. We recognize that every school is in a different place. Every school uses a different assessment platform, or they don't have an assessment platform they're using. So really helping go through this learning process where we understand all these things, have this shared experience. It's collaborative. You'll be working with people from all across the country in small breakout rooms and coming back together. You'll experience some assessments and watch how I take that data in real time and use it to share the results in a way that teachers could easily do with students. And then in the end, create a plan, or at least begin the process of creating a plan, having considered some really critical questions in that assessment planning process. So that's like a 2-minute overview of a 2-hour session.
Well, I'm coming. I've already signed up, so I'm there. So I just want to say thanks to our 2 guys here today. We sure miss Nancy, but we're glad that you could all join us today, and we hope that you have a great Tuesday wherever you're at. And we hope to see you attend our virtual leadership series where we will get more into this. We'll be back next Tuesday, sounds like, for one more. So Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Sarah.